While people are still arriving, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the Every Learner Everywhere Expert Network powered by ISTE. The Every Learner Everywhere network has recently launched our expert network and it offers professional learning and coaching for higher ed faculty and leaders to support their students through and beyond the COVID crisis, including the transition to digital learning. We encourage you to visit the Expert Network website. We are posting in the chat for more information and for an opportunity to schedule a no-cost coaching session. So I would like to welcome everybody to Strategies for Success in Online Teaching and Learning, an interactive conference series. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebeck, and I am the manager for network programs and services with Every Learner Everywhere. Before I introduce our moderator and panelists, I'd like to take out just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of 12 higher education organizations with expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of digital learning and its integration into pedagogical practices. Every Learner Everywhere is one of 3 solution networks sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The other 2 networks focus on advising and developmental education. We work with colleges and universities to build capacity among faculty and instructional support staff to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to help institutions use new technology to innovate teaching and learning with the ultimate goal of increasing student success, especially for first-generation college students, poverty-impacted students, and students of color. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's presentation, which we will share with you after the webinar. The recording email should go out on Tuesday. And throughout the presentation, we will welcome your questions and encourage them. And we will be monitoring the Q&A section of the webinar for those. If a participant raises their hand in the presentation, we will not be able to unmute you. So we ask that you post any of your questions in the Q&A section, or if you have to put them in the chat, we'll also be monitoring the chat. So as a biology professor and a former associate dean, I'm excited about today's panel discussion, what faculty need to know. Our moderator for today's panel is Dr. Megan Tassin, Director for Personalized Learning Consortium at the American Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. Megan directs the Adaptive Courseware for Early Success Grant for the PLC. And in this role, she supports and collaborates with academic leadership from a variety of four-year universities to effectively adopt and implement adaptive learning technologies. Her work centers on enhancing pedagogy, closing achievement gaps, improving accessibility, and ensuring that students from all walks of life have the support and resources necessary to graduate. Megan is a social scientist by training with expertise in qualitative and mixed method research. She has taught introductory and upper level courses at the University of Northern Iowa and Georgia State University. In addition to project management and sociological research, she has extensive experience in program evaluation, faculty development, instructional support, and active learning communities. She has a PhD from Georgia State University and an MA from the University of Northern Iowa. Our 2 panelists today are Kayla Jutsi, Senior Instructional Designer at Tulane University, and Sophia Strickfaden, E-Learning Technologist at the Colorado Community Colleges Online. Kayla started her instructional design career at Columbia College Chicago Online from 2016 to 2019. Prior to Columbia, she worked at the George Washington University for 5 years, where she served in various roles within higher education, such as student affairs, development, alumni relations, admissions, and student program support. Kayla holds an undergraduate degree in organizational communication from the University of West Florida, a master's in higher ed administration, and graduate certificate in instructional design from George Washington University. Sophia is an instructional and e-learning professional with 6 years experience in learning design for diverse target audiences of all ages, including minority, at-risk populations in public health and higher education. Sophia designs learning experiences based on frameworks of learning theory, appreciative inquiry, human-computer interaction, and e-learning industry trends. She completed a Master of Arts in Information and Learning Technologies with an emphasis in e-learning design and implementation from the University of Colorado, Denver. Sophia is strategizing about how to develop online courses for longevity, equity, and effectiveness for the Colorado Community Colleges Online. I will now hand it over to Dr. Tassin.
Thank you, Norma. Appreciate that introduction. And I am just honored to be in the presence of what sounds to be some very fabulous women here today, as well as our audience members. So thanks again, Norma, and thanks, Kayla and Sophia, for joining us today. As Norma mentioned, I'm Megan Tassin. I am the director of the Personalized Learning Consortium at APLU. And I'm looking forward to this conversation as well. What I anticipate will be a very engaging conversation about what we can learn from our instructional design folks about ensuring that our classes are not only engaging for students, but also impactful, and ensuring that students are learning and succeeding. And again, that those design principles are assisting the faculty in service of those students. So the structure today, I've got some questions that I'll be asking, and we encourage folks to use the Q&A feature within the space to submit your questions, and we will get to those as we can. But let's just go ahead and get started so we can have our conversation today. And I'll just pitch this to both Kayla and Sophia and see who wants to dive in first. So as we all know, this last year or so has been a little bit hectic and different for all of us in a variety of ways. And the emergency shift to remote teaching did not provide faculty with time to really consider what quality design looks like. But we're now beyond that emergency shift period, but we still remain sort of within this fluctuating space between online, face-to-face, hybrid sort of spaces. How vital is course design to student engagement and student success, especially considering the drastic transitions we and our students are experiencing?
Do you want to take that one first, or I can?
Go ahead, Kayla.
Sure. So we are at Tulane University. I work for the School of Professional Advancement. We do have a workshop model for our faculty to go through a very rigorous program of 20 weeks. And that's always been the case for the past few years. But for those who are teaching remote, either their class was scheduled to be online or they've decided they don't want to teach in the classroom, because we do have in-person instruction this year, we've started giving them a few months in advance to prepare their classes. And it's really important in the time of COVID, because people are very overwhelmed, they're very stressed out, that you have an online course presence that gives them exactly what they need when they need it. Even if a student is able to come to all of your sessions, maybe in the middle of the night on a Friday, they're like, oh, I have to do this course assignment. Where am I going to find this information? And so if everything's laid out right there in your course for them, they're able to get what they need at a time when you may be sleeping. And that way they don't have to send you messages in the middle of the night. So I think just having that anytime, anywhere access is really going to set them up for success.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you just touched on the proactive course design model that we practice at CCC Online. And I think it's common for us to forget that course design and development includes things like pedagogical alignment, curriculum considerations, instructional strategies, methods, even drafting your feedback statements for certain assignments in advance so you don't have to do it on the spot in real time. If you've taught a course multiple times, there are sticky points for all groups of students, or ones that you can sort of predict based on the students' knowledge coming in. So I always say, if you're going to design a course, do it while you're not teaching the course. It's really hard to take a step back and see it from that higher level, that more high level detail of what are the topics, what's the sequence, how does it align? It's really hard to see that when you're actually teaching the course. So it's 100% important. That's my answer to this, to how vital is course design. It's essentially in the online space, maybe even more important than in your face-to-face synchronous courses.
Definitely. And I would add that, you know, it's a lot easier in the classroom because students can either raise their hand or talk in small groups about immediate issues they're having. But when they're in an online setting, they're really on their own. And so when you think about what a student needs to know for your classroom, being more specific is important, but also the structure of your course. So if your university provides a template or any sort of guidance on what your course structure should look like, that way students don't have to feel lost every time they come into your course or someone else's course. And they know exactly how to get to their content when they need it because it's very familiar to them. And the navigation is pretty clear and obvious.
Yeah, we have a master course template. I don't know about Tulane
We
or
do too,
the
yeah.
professional school, but yeah, we use a master course template. We use a content development template that that matches the master course template. So when someone submits content to me and then I go build it into their online course, it has all the elements that we need, including things like alt text for the images or captions for the videos. So yeah, part of the reason why we do that is because it creates consistency between all of our courses. All of the navigation is pretty much exactly the same, with the exception of the publisher links and requirements for integration. But that just reduces the cognitive load that the students have to spend on figuring out where their assignments are or where their grades are. It's all in the same spot, in the same order in each of our course shells. So that's super helpful. I mean, one way, sort of like the hidden element behind what we're saying is respecting your students' time, energy, and focus. Do you really want them to spend time learning how to use a tool or trying to find something or doing a scavenger hunt, essentially an informal one in your online course, when really you want them to spend time doing the assignment or learning the information? So planning ahead and being intentional in how you design and curate all of your course content and the way that it's structured is really important to maintain that respect and rapport with the students.
Thank you both for that. I have a slight follow-up on that same question for you. You guys got me thinking about just hitting back on that point of the sort of transitions back and forth. So obviously last year, many people were teaching face-to-face and had to go online immediately, right? And now we're in this space where in the upcoming academic year, we could potentially have that happen again. So how can faculty, kind of help prepare for, switching back and forth potentially, and how does instructional design help them prepare for that if in the event that something like, another spring 2020 happens in the upcoming year?
I would recommend essentially expecting to be teaching online, because it does take more organization and advanced planning. And then turning things off or hiding them from the students in the online space if you are face-to-face. So say that you typically would do a project or a collaborative paper in your face-to-face course. The students still have to collaborate and meet up and figure out how to do that student-to-student interaction. So maybe in the online space, you have a peer-to-peer structure set up in your online course before the course starts. And if you don't have to use it, you just turn it off. You disable it for the students, leave it there for the next section that you have to teach. It's really flexible if you have it produced and set up and organized in advance, and then you can just revert back to face-to-face and class instruction. What I've found though is the students still want those tools. They still want that online peer-to-peer review or structure in their online course. So that's one thing to consider, is they're experiencing these tools and these environments in other courses. And so if you strip them of that, just because you're going back to face-to-face, they might have expectations that counteract what you're expecting of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we do as well. Most of our online courses are prepared to be taught online, but we use them if instructors want to teach on ground or in a hybrid model. And they adjust those discussions, or maybe they add more Zoom sessions, things like that. I would say to really try to utilize your in-person time if you have it, even if it's in person or if it's on Zoom, to be more interactive. And you can do some of those conversations even on on an online discussion. So if you have a group project, students could meet for their group project while they're in the class, but then still use that discussion board to talk about course content. So just keeping it more flexible will make it a lot easier.
Thank you. And we already have several questions coming in, and since they are pertinent to some of the conversation we have going on right now, I'll just dive into that as well. So I have a question about, let's see, this is from Satish, and he says, or they say, I know we adjust the teaching materials based on the class needs, but with virtual versus in person, do we have to change the materials so students will be more engaged?
I think my answer is it depends.
Yeah.
It really depends on the outcome that you're meeting with the student materials. Are your materials aligned to the assessment that they will be submitting? Are the assessments aligned to the course outcomes that you're hoping that they'll meet by the end of the course? I think the materials question sort of depends on how you put together materials. Honestly, my answer is if it's designed well and it's something that's equitable and accessible for all, your materials really shouldn't have to change. What might change is your instructions, the information you share, the amount of advanced simple videos that you record to show them, this is where you submit this is where your group space is, this is where you get information from the library. There might be some of that involved in changing from the face-to-face to the online environment, but really your materials shouldn't be changing too much if you're set up from the beginning with a good course design.
Definitely. I would say it would be exactly the same. So if you're getting into that habit of putting things in your LMS and providing files and resources ahead of time, then students have what they need before they even come to class. It's saving paper. You don't have to make any sort of copies or give them any sort of resources in the classroom. It just might affect the order that you might want students to watch things. If there's any sort of like external videos, maybe you want them to watch it before class, or maybe you want to watch it in class and discuss it. So think about how you're going to structure your lecture time if you are teaching remotely or in person as you're going through the semester. Or if you want to do a flipped classroom model where they watch it in the LMS and then they come to class and you discuss it then in person. So it's really up to you and kind of what works best for the structure of your course and your pedagogy.
Totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
The question of, though, if we switched materials with assignments or activities, that might be where things change the most, if that makes any sense. So your materials probably are going to stay the same. The students still have to buy the textbook, they still have to access the links, they still have to watch the videos, but how they present their work to you and how they provide it to you is much different in the online space than face-to-face.
Right, definitely.
Thank you both for that. And we have several other questions coming. I want to get to a point that references one of those, as well as something that you had mentioned, Sophia, around equity and accessibility. So I think that's some very important things that we should definitely be thinking about. First, I'm going to hit on a question from Karen Mash, as well as a question that we had sent you previously. But in terms of Karen's question, she asked, has there been much feedback with the success of accessibility with the, sorry, the question just jumped on my screen. So I'm dealing with the,
No worries.
hang on, where did it go? Sorry. Okay. Sorry, don't, for folks moderating, don't hit the answered question until I'm done reading the question, please, because it changes screens. All right, so has there been much feedback with the success of accessibility with the transition to online courses? Have the majority of students with accessibility needs been successful online?
Go ahead, Kayla.
We pretty much design all of our courses to be accessible from the beginning. So the issue of this course isn't accessible hasn't come up yet. We do our best to make sure that all of our videos are captioned, but there is a course it's a long story that I won't get into, where a student is enrolled who does need those captions to be fixed, and we haven't yet. So luckily we have resources. We'll work with our student accessibility office to adjust those captions. But as instructional designers are reviewing our courses, we look for those things like alt text and scanned PDFs and video captioning. I would say it's really important to think about what are the necessary steps that your school recommends to make sure your course is accessible, if they have a checklist, if they don't, and who at your accessibility office might have those types of resources. The more you prepare ahead of time, the easier it will be if a student happens to show up in one of your classes who needs those resources. So you design for those students in mind so it accommodates for everyone. Because it is a lot of work. Having to adjust a scanned PDF file is not an easy task. I have student workers who fix all of those things for me when I'm reviewing courses, and oftentimes you run that OCR button in Adobe and it spits out something that's illegible. So keep that in mind to be prepared.
Oh, so sorry, Kayla.
No,
I'm watching the chat on the side. A question just came in with auto captioning, how it's not very good. For us, auto captioning doesn't reach our minimal accuracy of 97%. So a lot of times I am the person who has to caption things if it's not captioned correctly. So some ways to sort of think of this efficiently and longitudinally is if you have a library resource such as Films on Demand or Canopy, usually those videos are captioned because they are educational materials and it is an educational database that they know that that's part of what the requirements they have to meet. So if you stick with those resources that are of zero cost to the students, but also already provided through their student fees, it's usually something you can easily integrate into your online course. So if you currently have YouTube videos that are, say, a French demonstration of how to have a conversation with a hotel concierge or something, I don't know, that's an example from a course I was recently building. Double check the captions are correct, especially if you're the only person on the project that actually speaks French. And if they aren't correct, see what your options are. It's not up to only you to make sure that you're in compliance. Most institutions are required through accreditation to have an accessibility team or accessibility representative or someone who's qualified in that area to meet those needs of those students. Another tip is I have worked at institutions before and with teams on contracts before where they have a third party that they just have approved through their tech and business office, such as rev.com, that's rev.com. And when we come across, say an instructor is doing open pedagogy and a student finds an awesome video that is relevant, current event, reflective, all of that stuff, but it's not captioned very well because they're using the auto captions, you can submit that video to rev.com so they can caption it and then, or transcribe it really is what you're asking for. And usually within 24 hours, we have a transcription that we can post underneath the video or share with that particular student who needs that type of accommodation. I think it's, and then you have it forever. That's the other thing is, then in the future, if you decide to include that video in your course design, you have the transcription. So there is some like just-in-time solution that you can think about. But if you know that you have a certain student makeup of that would require certain accessibility needs, hopefully there's someone on your campus who's reaching out to you before the term starts to let you know, hey, you have a student enrolled in your course that needs XYZ accommodations, and then you can work with the accessibility rep or the instructional design team or an e-learning technologist like me to make sure that it's in compliance.
Thank you for that. And just to sort of continue this conversation on equity and accessibility. So this past year, I think we know that we have inequities in the higher ed institutions already, right? But this last year has really exacerbated and highlighted where some of those pain points are. What strategies might faculty consider in their course design and pedagogical practices that can help them address some of these longstanding inequities that are now currently, heightened, but still there nonetheless, even when we're not facing a global pandemic?
I would say just off the top of my head for faculty to be more flexible with their coursework. So having deadlines that are maybe at the end of the week, like due by Sunday at 11:59, providing recordings of all of your sessions. So if a student isn't able to attend class or isn't able to log into Zoom at that particular time, they can still watch the recording at a later date. And really understanding that this is a hard time for all of us. And so students may have the best intentions of showing up to every class session, but some weeks they just may not get to it. So keeping those lines of communication open with your students is going to be really important, so they know that you're here to support them to get through the classes and stay on their goals while they're in the middle of a global pandemic.
I'm so sorry. I was answering the question from Marilyn in the chat about what to do with her recorded lectures. So I have forgotten the question already. I apologize.
It's all good. We're just, again, discussing strategies for faculty to really think about addressing some of these institutionalized inequities that are, that surface in the classes as they're thinking about course design.
Yeah, I mean, one of them is accessibility, but universal design for learning. And I'm sorry, Kayla, if you mentioned that, and I'm repeating you, but essentially providing choice in assignment, choice in assignment style or method or submission style. So if you have, for instance, a philosophy course where you're having the students analyze a piece of work from a philosopher and make real life connections or self-reflection on it, you could have them, you could give them 3 options: write a paper, record a podcast, or create an infographic with a small write-up of where they made the connection. That's a wonderful way to say, I'm meeting you where you're at. Someone who doesn't want to write a paper can do an infographic, or someone who really is much better at verbal or audio presentations can do a podcast. And then there's that sort of anticipation of variety for the students and for you when you go to grade that project or that assignment, and it's just so much more exciting. So that's one way to create equitable universal designs while at the same time increasing engagement and creating some of that flexibility and high flex that we talk about in your course. That's something that can happen in a face-to-face course too.
Definitely. And also using online discussions regularly so that students who may feel weary of speaking up on Zoom have an opportunity to still be a part of the conversation, because it is a different field that a lot of people just aren't used to. So I'd say giving students a variety of choices along with the assignment types for discussion would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and if you have time, a variety of delivery of the content. The reason why I say if you have time is it takes a lot of time to curate all of the things that are parallel and equitable. So I always caution us in proposing a course design that includes that for each module, because it really is hard to develop and create all of those materials so that they are the same between each. So if a student only views the video or only reads the textbook, they aren't missing information. That's part of the reason why I say that.
This may hit on, because you're already talking about all these different, I guess, forms of delivering different content and having students engage. We have another question from Elizabeth Fountain about, so what are some of the ways that good design can accommodate or be responsive to inequities in technology access? So not just accessibility, but the actual access, especially right now with broadband access. All of us are getting kicked off in the internet all the time these days. And I think that's true for faculty as well. How can they make adjustments and think about the design to help prepare for that?
I think about this all the time. So 3 tips off the top of my head. Don't create videos that are longer than 10 minutes. If you are recording a lecture that's usually 2 hours, break it down. Focus on one outcome at a time, record that outcome, and then post it under that outcome. Make the very clear connection for the students of where this video fits within the course and how it will add to their success. Another one is try to focus on 1 or 2 tools or external tools instead of including like 25. I think it's really easy for us to say, oh, I found this alternative to discussions, and I found this alternative to presentations, and I found this alternative to this, and I want to try them all. It really increases that bandwidth, not only for you and your cognitions, but also for the students and the amount of cookies that they're storing on their browser, or the number of apps that they have to download on their phone. It's really important for us to consider that slim design while also being intentional about the engagement. If all you want to use are the tools and the features that are included in your learning management system, that should be fine, unless there's some sort of departmental goal that focuses on being innovative outside of the learning management system. I highly recommend learning how to use the tools that you've been given within the environment that you've been given to engage your students from a pedagogical and andragogical level, as opposed to, oh, we're creating videos every day. I think there's definitely something to be said about being innovative and forward thinking while at the same time considering, do our students actually have the bandwidth to load this discussion board that has 25 videos uploaded? a lot of times the answer is no, my computer can't even do that. And I have, you know, this fancy MacBook with, you know, fast internet, and it takes time. So yeah, those are my tips. Shorter videos, focus on 1 or 2 tools, and then make sure that you're not asking too much of the students. And one thing that I always mention when I'm talking about this with third-party tools is consider what you're asking the students to agree to. There is a huge movement right now in higher ed to consider data protection and equity and ethics. So things like having them do an Instagram scavenger hunt could cause some ethical issues, because in the user agreement, it says things like, we retain the right to store and sell and distribute your facial recognition data. Is that really something that we would like to ask our students to do? That many of them are already on Instagram, but there are some that are more aware and would rather not give permissions to social media or a third-party tool to have that data about themselves. So think about what you're asking your students to agree to. That's one way to think about it equitably. And usually with that extra tracking and data collection in those tools, there's an increased bandwidth need too. So.
And then I would also add that your LMS may have a mobile app. So as you're working on your course and putting information in the web version, you can also download the mobile app of your course and make sure that things work on the phones. Because if the student doesn't have internet at home, they're probably going to go to that next device that does have internet. So think of that. And then if, like, we work with Canvas, so there's an option to publish your course for an e-reader where students can download information and use it offline. So that is another tool if a student may lose their internet access or need a way to read it that doesn't require an internet connection, you can send them that file. So those are just 2 additional tools I would recommend in addition to what Sophia said.
Well, on the topic of tools and technology, we often get asked, like, which tools are the best? Which technology should I be using, and which are the best for course design and student engagement? So what advice would you offer faculty who want to know which tools are the best for students interacting and engaging, as well as just, you know, general course design?
My answer to this is always, well, what are you trying to accomplish? How does this fit your outcome? What assessments or activities are the students doing, or what do the students need to be able to do to prove to you that they've met that outcome? And then we will select a tool. So things like collaborative communication, that's something you can easily observe in a discussion, but you could also consider using a tool like Padlet, which is a collaborative bulletin board that you can set to be live or hidden or whatever. And it's a very common tool in higher ed, especially. But it is something that I always ask, well, what are you trying to get the students to be able to do? And from there, once we have the design and the pedagogical alignment done, then we can determine what the tool should be. Otherwise, if I can be honest, tools, there are so many tools out there. So if you find one you really like that generally meets a lot of the outcomes that you would be teaching within your program or your curriculum, focus on that, especially if it's something that requires a small subscription fee. I highly recommend just saying, I use this for all of my courses, and this is where I'm comfortable. And this is, now that I have students that take a lot of my courses, they know that we'll be using this tool, and they're already set up and they're already familiar with it. So that's my tip, is first determine your design, and then second, determine your strategy and method.
Yeah, and I would also say that use what's in the LMS first. So if your learning management system has a variety of tool options, don't try to add anything external before you really know what that option is capable of. There are a lot of tools even within Canvas that I think a lot of our instructors don't know how to use. And so we start there. Well, how can we do this natively in the LMS first? Because we know that that's accessible and that's going to work for students. And that's really what they have access to. And really start with the basics of course design before you add any tools. Do you have all the elements that your school recommends? Are you following best practices? And once you have that standard down, then you can start to add in the more exciting and engaging tools to make things more interesting.
Yeah. It just dawned on me, one thing that we do know in higher ed and especially online learning is that things that promote engagement and commitment and attrition are relationships, and building those relationships with your students, making sure that they feel like they belong. So it often doesn't come down to what tools or how many tools or what they do. It comes down to whether or not you are engaged with your students and engaged with the course, and allowing them to self-direct to a certain extent on where they're headed with with your content and their lessons. That's, I would say, like, just being organized enough to utilize the messaging system that your school requires of you, paying attention to the discussion boards, but not jumping in too early, while at the same time sort of facilitating that thought process and that transformational learning. I think that's maybe even more important than determining which tools from, you know, the internet sphere you can integrate into your course.
Well, thank you both for that. And I'll just add that, you know, with the work that APLU has been doing in adaptive courseware adoption, we've been working with a ton of different tools, and we often tell folks it's not necessarily the tool, it's how you use it, and it's who on your campus you're connecting with to understand how to do that well and how to integrate it, not only into your course design, but, you know, even, you know, into advising systems and making sure interventions are happening where they need to happen and things are all in the LMS as they need to be. So I appreciate you saying that. Now, also on this sort of topic of student engagement practices, we have a nice question that's been upvoted in our Q&A as not just what are the best practices, but what are the next practices for engaging students? So what's coming in the pipeline? What are things that we're thinking about?
I don't know if I've thought about that question recently, to be honest. I'll say that my next question is, when am I going to get a vaccine? Controversial or not. When can I go back to the office and think about what's my next step in enhancing my course design? That's kind of where I'm at these days, is using the tools I have and using those tools really well is kind of going to get me the end of the pandemic. And then once we get out of the pandemic and we have a break, then that's when I've really thought about how can we increase interaction with students and encourage faculty to take what they've learned since March of 2020 to then enhance their experience. I know that doesn't answer your question, but that's just my honest truth.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of unknowns still with education. So one thing that we do know is that a lot of our students, especially at community colleges and state level colleges, they are using mobile devices more often to complete their coursework, especially if they have a long commute. So things like captions and videos and bandwidth are something to keep in mind. And I'm starting to think of things as, are we mobile first? Not just mobile friendly, but are we mobile first? When we adopt a new publisher tool or a new whatever style, is it something that's responsive enough and small enough of a file that the students can load while they're on a bus, you know, riding a bus between cities? So that's my next thing, is how are we considering how the students are actually accessing our courses? Where is our data? If we don't have that data, how do we collect it? And what are we going to do with that data once we have it? And that data is not just, oh, how are our students rating our courses? It's how are our students accessing the LMS? How are they accessing our lecture content and material? When really is my question. When are they accessing it? I mean, I taught a class once where when I ran the report in the learning management system on engagement, a lot of them were doing their homework at like 2 a.m. And although I wouldn't be online at 2 a.m., maybe that's something I need to consider on when am I sending them updates or sending them announcements or sending them reminders. If most of them are working at midnight, maybe that's when I schedule things to go out, because that's when they're signing on and looking at things. I thought it was unexpected, but once I got to know the students a little better, I realized many of them worked in the hospitality industry, so they didn't get off work until 11 or midnight. A lot of them were caring for family members or children and that's the only time that they could get online to complete that coursework or submit their assignments. So that is my next step always, is how we're meeting the students where they are. And the thing that we're finding is that we have at least 50% of our students, at least in the 2019-2020 school year, that reported accessing our online content and materials on a mobile device, and 5% are strictly on a mobile device. So 5% of our students don't have a computer or don't have easy access to a computer. Of course, we have them on campuses, but when we're closed down in isolation because of COVID, they don't necessarily have access to those technological hardware resources that otherwise would be easy to.
Yeah, I
That's a good
appreciate
point.
that.
Yeah.
Kayla, did you want to add something, or?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things that aren't new or the next trend that I'm currently trying to encourage my faculty to use is more video discussions, whether that's right within your learning management system or if you have a tool integrated. We use Canvas Studio, so students are able to upload their videos with that. And also creating podcast lectures. So if they're using the mobile device, they can also listen to those while they're in the car. But make sure if you're doing podcasts that you're telling a story, that you're making things resonate, and listen to examples. I love podcasts for personal usage. Like This American Life, I think, does a really great job of sharing really good personal stories that I often remember quite often, which really shows the power of storytelling for learning. When a class I'm just reviewing for work has a story, I still can remember it 8 months later because it made an impact. So be thinking of those things as you're preparing for your next semester.
Yeah, I think you're both really highlighting too just the importance of knowing who your students are and what they're experiencing, and making your design and pedagogy decisions based off of that. Because our students are getting just increasingly less traditional in the sense of who they are, and access issues, backgrounds, et cetera, what they're dealing in their day-to-day lives, and making accommodations for them to make sure that we're providing a space that they can learn in the best way possible to do that. I'm going to go ahead and shift back to us to some of these Q&As that are coming in. And so this was an anonymous one, but so one of the things that we keep hearing from the universities that I'm working with is that, especially right now, and faculty have always just been, they do a lot. Everybody's doing a lot, especially right now. Seems that everybody's kind of at capacity or just taking on even more workload as well. So when considering, and this question was about an online course, but I think this is also true for whether it's a hybrid, blended, or face-to-face course. As an instructor is, taking the time and effort to ensure the quality of that course, how much of that responsibility is on the instructor's shoulders, and how much is on the institution and the college, and how can they help support those faculty?
Good question.
Kayla.
I would say first reach out to the people that you work with your institution to see what resources are available. Maybe there's a department within your university that you've never heard of, or that you have seen in a newsletter but haven't reached out to yet. A lot of schools have centralized departments that are based on instructional technology. So even though I serve the School of Professional Advancement at my university, there is an innovative learning center that services the entire institution. And so basic questions like, how do I use Zoom, or how do I use Canvas? They will work with faculty and support them on those types of things. So I would say always start with the resources first. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There are people who use these things all the time. Like I tell my faculty, I'm in Canvas all day. So something that might take you 2 hours would take me 5 seconds, just because I'm so familiar with it. We need you to focus on your content and your teaching. And there are probably resources in place to help you with those other more difficult things that you're not used to all the time. And that's totally fine to not be able to use something at an expert level. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I think along those lines, this is going to exit the individual responsibility level and enter into institutional responsibility level, because if we don't have policies and guidelines and requirements of what course quality looks like, what high quality instruction looks like, what online courses with high quality instruction look like from the departmental or the institutional level, then there tends to be a minimal level of justification for that type of professional development. So if you feel individually like you are not prepared to meet the expectations of your department or your institution, ask them what their plan is to skills up the people like you. And maybe even offer some solutions. Say, look, I would love to be able to do this, but I can't. And these are the skills and the areas that I'm really unsure about. What are my options? Sometimes there's a mentorship option where they can partner you with a staff member or a fellow faculty member, or even a student who can help you navigate some of those skills up areas for yourself. Other times it's a matter of asking for a guest speaker or for a group of you to go through a training together on this type of thing. I know that professional development budgets have been tight. So I also want to mention that if you haven't looked through your library databases and things like LinkedIn Learning and you have access to those, I highly recommend it. You likely have access to courses that teach you how to use things like Outlook and D2L or Canvas. And there are even ones that say, like, the course is literally teaching online or teaching with technology online. So if you haven't looked at the resources and the opportunities that are already available to you, I highly recommend it. And if you need sort of like a learning network, reach out to your colleagues that you think would be interested in learning with you, because our collaborative and social learning space is so much stronger than learning and going through a self-paced training on your own. There are benefits, obviously, to self-paced training without a group of colleagues, such as I'm learning how to use Dreamweaver better and like manage our server setup. That's not something I have to do with someone else, you know, like I'm just going through my training on my own and getting used to the system. But things like how to teach online, being able to help each other and make recommendations and also share that cultural and student-based background is really helpful. So that's my recommendation, is either there's a policy that's sort of requiring you to do this, and if so, then your institution should have a structure for you to get that training. But if not, you might have access to some free resources already.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One of the things that helps me in my own position, I have a federal work study intern that I'm able to hire in my department. And this is the first time we've ever had any sort of position like that, even in our school. And I was just like, could we hire a federal work study intern, which is a low cost way to have assistance and also give a student real hands-on experience. And now we have 2 of them, and then we have other interns in other departments, and we have program directors who are also hiring interns. So it kind of started this new trend of offering students with experience, but also finding ways to have assistance. So maybe they're not your dedicated, work study student, but they're somebody that can work within your department and provide a variety of support resources. And especially students are a lot more tech savvy than the rest of us. So you'd be surprised at what they just kind of jump into and help you figure out.
Thanks,
Totally.
Kayla.
Just watching them use the learning management system is helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I'm in it, and I'm in e-learning tech, and I can control most of it. And it's like still helpful to see how they use the tool.
Thank you both. So we've got a little bit of a shift, but we've got multiple questions coming in, and you'd referenced earlier these sort of templates that faculty would use, and especially around the sort of issues of potential pushback and academic freedom by faculty. Just kind of curious of what you've encountered in that, or advice for folks to how to kind of manage that and ensure things are being done in a way that makes sense for everybody while also instilling academic freedom for faculty.
We just made the same face.
Yeah, I deal with this all the time. We have master course templates in our school that are really mandated by our Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. And the template structure is there to help faculty. It's not there to hinder faculty or to stifle their creativity or to take away their academic freedom. It's there for the student's best interest and to make sure that students don't have cognitive overload on how to access your course materials or how to find things in your course. With Canvas, and I'm sure with other LMSs, there are a lot of ways to organize material. I remember as a college student back in 2005, when I would always land into a course and be like, okay, where's the things I need? How do I submit my assignment? How do I find these resources? I felt continuously lost. And I was pretty tech savvy and grew up with a computer. So it just really, having that navigation structure and having that consistent look and feel to your courses takes the work away from you trying to figure out what the navigation structure should be, and it takes the work away from student, so that you can focus on the content and the thing that you're the best at. I always tell the faculty I work with, I can make a really pretty template, but I can't make a course without you. So that's the thing that is the most important.
Yeah, we get a decent amount of pushback because not only do we use templates, and we have a templated process that for the same reasons meets student-centered learning, has consistent design, also has accessibility and sort of quality assurance and quality matters built in. But we get a lot of pushback because we also use development shells. So we develop our courses, every single one that we offer at CCC Online. We develop in advance, and then that becomes the master version of whatever that course is. And then once we know the enrollment for the next term, we duplicate it and assign an instructor, and then they make their edits to the announcements and the things that they have control over. So that's part of where we get the pushback, is like, not only is there a master template, which really has nothing to do with academic freedom. That's computer systems design, that's user experience design, that's student experience design. It has nothing to do with the content or the academics, honestly. And that's why I made that face earlier. That was like, because templates are not a part of your academic freedom. And if that's something that you disagree with, totally, you can have that. But that is not a part of our policy in the way that we see it where we are. So where we get the pushback, to get back to that, is on things like discussion board topics, the way the grade books are set up, how the points are done for the grading and evaluation. That's something that we do have templated because we are such a large, we have something like 125,000 students that are likely to be taking our courses at any point in time. Not only do we have 16-week courses and 15-week courses, 15-week courses, but we also have 6-week courses and 10-week courses. And a lot of the courses we offer are offered in all of those different scheduling types. So it's important for us to make sure that if you're a student taking this in a 6-week course or a 15-week course, you're still getting the same learning experience with the same outcomes, the same content, and we are measuring you on the same level. It needs to be equitable, not just between course sections, but it has to be equitable for all students. So if I took a course in 2020 and the course hasn't been redesigned, the students who are taking it now should have the exact same outcomes and the exact same opportunities that I had last year. So that is part of the reason why we use it, and part of the reason why academic freedom relates to the academics. I mean, the way that you facilitate and instruct your course is included in your academic freedom, you know, with the exceptions of FERPA and data privacy and all those things. But when you teach for a structure like ours, part of that agreement is like, we're giving you the course and you are essentially the facilitator and the instructor. And like I said, not everyone likes it, but also we aren't paying you to redesign the course. You're not, you know, at our institution, you're not really full-time, if that makes any sense. So I don't know if I'm just in a unique situation with our online department, but essentially the academic freedom comes when you serve as a subject matter expert and not necessarily as an instructor.
And I do want to be mindful of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left for our Q&A portion, and then I believe Norma's going to take over. So I'm just going to pitch a question to both of you, is like, you know, most important takeaways for our audience members here today. We'll start with you, Kayla. What would you say are the 3 most important things that an instructor should be considering about engaging students in an online environment?
So, I mean, first I would say to have done a majority of the work up front, you know, start early. That's really important. The second would be to work on building your relationships with your students to make them feel like they're part of a learning community, because when they are remote or at a distance, sometimes they can feel really isolated. So reaching out regularly is really important. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Figure out what resources your institution provides. See if there's anyone who can provide more assistance to you, and know that you're not alone in this process. There's probably more than 3 things, but that's what I was going for.
All good. Sophia.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to echo. Don't work alone, especially if it's something that is outside of your area of expertise. We're not all qualified in the same way to be the teachers and the instructors that we are. If you're an expert in business, that doesn't mean necessarily that you have a degree in teaching and pedagogy and online instruction. So there's likely a team or someone on your campus or in your institution that can help you determine what that looks like within the scope of your course or your topic. So yeah, definitely don't work alone. The other one is try to plan ahead, be proactive, design your course in advance. And if you can't do that, do at least 3 weeks at a time. So before your course even starts, make sure you have the first 3 weeks planned and set and like put together, you know, how you're going to grade, how many points everything is, the syllabus is like down pat. We don't always have the luxury of time, right? But if you can be proactive as possible, that's the best way to do it. And then also just making sure that your course design is slim and it's focused and you don't have a lot of fluff. In the online course environment, we have different motivational and attention challenges to think about. And with all of the extra stuff that doesn't add to the course learning outcomes or the student success likelihood, we have rabbit holes and we have busy work. And this sort of goes back to building rapport and relationships with your students. If you have the reputation of assigning busy work or creating unnecessary activities, then you might not get the same enrollment or the same attention as you used to in a face-to-face. It's just the matter of the online environment. Our expectations of what things look like in the online environment are much different than what they look like in the face-to-face environment. So just be mindful that if you're including stuff that isn't absolutely necessary in your course, don't include it, just delete it. Even if you love it and it's like the best thing ever, put it in like a resources page, like I just shared in the chat. And if it comes up, just say, hey, check out my resources page and let me know if you want to talk about this or set up an office hours. And then it's up to the student to have that conversation with you.
Appreciate that, Sophia and Kayla, and thank you both. Yes, work smarter, not harder, and let's work together because we work better when we're together. So appreciate you both being here today with us. And Norma, I believe you had some announcements for our audience today, and thanks to the audience for joining us on this Friday afternoon as well.
So yes, I want to thank everybody, including Megan, Kayla, and Sophia for their time. We really do appreciate the efforts that y'all have put in for us today and all the wonderful questions from our participants. We do ask that our participants take a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's presentation using the link that we're going to be posting in the chat. If you've got something going on immediately after, don't worry. We'll send you the link to the survey when we send you the recording link. Once again, I really would just like to remind you and encourage you to visit the Every Learner Everywhere website, our resources page, and our expert network page. Again, thank you to our moderator, Dr. Megan Tassine, our panelists, Kayla Jutsi and Sophia Strickfadden, and thank you to our audience for participating in today's discussion. We look forward to seeing you next week for our webinar, Differentiated Instruction for Equity in Higher Education. Thank you very much and have a great day.